Nearly 100,000 Russian troops are positioned along its border with Ukraine. U.S. officials, including the president, continue to warn that a Russian invasion will be met with severe consequences.
Do I think he'll test the West, test the United States and NATO as significantly as he can? Yes, I think he will. But I think he'll pay a serious and dear price for it that he doesn't think now will cost him what it's going to cost him. And I think he'll regret having done it. Now,
let's bring in CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and Face the Nation moderator, Margaret Brennan. Hi there, Margaret. So the president drew criticism for his remarks yesterday when he seemingly suggested that a, quote, minor incursion of Russian forces into Ukraine would draw less severe consequences from the U.S. Well, today he tried to clarify his remarks.
I've been absolutely clear with President Putin. He has no misunderstanding. If any assembled Russian units move across the Ukrainian border, that is an invasion. But it will be met with severe and coordinated economic response that I've discussed in detail with our allies, as well as laid out very clearly for President Putin. But there is no doubt, let there be no doubt at all, that if Putin makes this choice, Russia will pay a heavy price.
So, Margaret, it looks like you tried to do some cleanup there. What is the president getting at?
Yeah. That was absolutely an attempt to clean up his remarks from the day prior. Ukraine's president was very clear in both Ukrainian and English when he tweeted today that there is no such thing as a minor incursion, and he reminded the great powers of that point. So the president's missteps there, this wasn't just political criticism. This is something that it was not well received in Kyiv, certainly, and what the president was doing was essentially being a little too honest, according to some of the experts that I have spoken to, including former ambassadors and presidential advisors who have said, look at what Russia has done. In 2014, when they annexed and they seized Crimea, part of Ukraine, they used, the joke was, little green men, not assembled units. They used operatives, they used sabotage, they used disinformation, they used different ways to get to the ends that Vladimir Putin wanted. This time he has assembled uniformed troops along the Ukrainian border, and he has done that to the east, where there's over 100,000, as you mentioned. He has now done that to the north this week with troops arriving in Belarus, and as I mentioned, Crimea in the south is already a Russian annexed territory. So he has virtually encircled Ukraine. So what President Biden was trying to do today was to give his diplomats a little bit more edge when they sit at that negotiating table across from the Russians on Friday. Now, the U.S. says they're not negotiating, they're just talking, meaning they don't want to put any offers on the table. They want to essentially get Russia to back down. But the president was a little too honest, as I was told yesterday, when he essentially said there are different grades of U.S. response based on the size and scale and scope of Russian incursion.
And Margaret, I want to ask about some of your reporting that several NATO countries, including some in the Baltic region, are sending U.S.-made weapons into Ukraine. First of all, what more can you tell us about that, and what does this signal?
This is the transfer of some significant weaponry and defense systems to Ukraine. And this is an effort by the United States to get as much defense ability into Ukraine as quickly as possible. We're talking about Javelin anti-tank systems, what the Ukrainians could use to shoot back at a Russian tank. We are talking about Stinger missiles, a defense system that could help them to, for instance, shoot down a Russian helicopter in the event of an invasion. So these are significant forms of defense systems that the United States has greenlit for transfer to Ukraine. Why transfer? Well, this is what the United States has already sold to Baltic countries. We're talking about Estonia and others. They bought these U.S. systems. They have them in their warehouses. And what the United States is doing, what Biden administration is saying, is we're giving you permission to release those to Ukraine. Why? You can't order a weapon system on short turnaround. As one State Department official said to me, this isn't like ordering on Amazon. These things are made by American manufacturers, and because of U.S. law, the State Department has to approve and notify Congress before any of these weapon systems are sold to a foreign government. That's out of the U.S.'s own self-defense and self-interest. So our country sold those to these Baltic nations, and in order to get them to Ukraine quickly, we're saying, hey, can you front them, essentially a Stinger missile or a Javelin? And so that is what's happening right now. The other thing that is being transferred are 5 helicopters that were sitting in Ukraine. They were sitting in Ukraine for servicing, and the reason that they just happened to be there is because they were intended for Afghan forces, for a military that essentially no longer exists because the Afghan government has disintegrated, as you know, back in August. So these helicopters, which were sitting there waiting to be serviced in Ukraine, are now being transferred from the U.S. government because U.S. taxpayers bought them for the Afghans. And now we're essentially tossing over the keys to the Ukrainian government, saying, here are 5 more for your forces. So this is an effort to get as much defense to the Ukrainians as quickly as possible.
And Margaret, just for some context here, other U.S. presidents have resisted taking this step in the past. Is that right? This is something that I know has been asked of other presidents about whether or not they would be willing to go ahead and provide arms to Ukraine.
Yes, and each step of weaponry has involved significant debate. Now, remember, it was the Trump administration that okayed those Javelin missiles to be given directly from the U.S., sold, I should say, to Ukraine a few years ago. And more of those systems are now being transferred via these other NATO members in this latest transaction that Congress was just notified about. But back during the Obama administration, you may remember, this was a real debate and a big criticism after Russia went into Ukraine and seized that territory. There was criticism that the Obama administration didn't provide weapons that the Ukrainians could use to defend themselves more strongly. They were providing, night vision goggles, other things that could be used by a military, but not with the same degree of lethality as the systems that I just mentioned. So this is a step up. The Ukrainian military itself has already been, as I mentioned, by the Trump administration specifically, better armed than they were and better trained than they were just a few years ago. So this is a different scenario than in 2014, and that's one of the messages as well from the Biden administration, that and President Biden pretty much said it when he said, look, yesterday, Russia has military superiority, but it will come at a cost. The Ukrainians are better armed. They can shoot back. And the United States and Western powers have given them the weapons to do so. But that we are not at the point of giving more, quote unquote, offensive weapons. There is more the Biden administration will do if Russia goes ahead with this invasion across the border.
So against that backdrop, Margaret, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling in Europe and will meet with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Is there, though, still a diplomatic solution to be had here?
That is absolutely the big hope of not just the United States, but all the Western powers, who are, to be clear, still not completely convinced that they know the set of calculations Vladimir Putin is making. They know a pattern of behavior. And what you heard President Biden say during that press conference yesterday was his own personal view that Vladimir Putin has to do something. Exactly what that something is unclear. But he has given himself all these options. He has created facts on the ground. He has changed the dynamic because he has, frankly, frightened the rest of Europe. And he has frightened the alliance that he could do something more. And so he has upped his leverage for these negotiations that are potentially going to happen tomorrow. We know a meeting will be there. We know the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, has been clear that he's not coming making offers. They have floated things that could be done in a reciprocal manner, meaning if you put limits on your military exercises, we'll put them on ours, but has made clear the United States is not making any kind of concession at this point. So it's not clear exactly what the diplomatic off-road is. Vladimir Putin is looking for something. Clearly what he's been offered to date is not enough for him to get back to back down, but we will see what happens.
Well, I also want to ask you about the Iran nuclear deal. A top French diplomat suggested that negotiations between the West and Iran over its nuclear program are in a, quote, life-threatening emergency situation. Margaret, what's the latest on that?
Well, the French there, who are, remember, part of this international agreement. This was not just the U.S. and Iran. It was the Western powers, along with Russia, China, the EU, the UK, Germany, France. They're all part and parcel of this. So that is why it's such a complicated set of negotiations. There are so many different players, but really the one holdout here is the Iranian government, which says it wants to keep talking, but they, at the same time, continue to develop parts of their nuclear program. And that is what the French minister was talking about there, saying you can't sit with us in Vienna and have a negotiation while your scientists back home continue to do this work. It doesn't work that way. You need to hit pause. And so far, it is really the Western powers in particular, the United States and the Europeans, who are holding out hope that they can get Iran to do something to put their nuclear program back in the box. But whether it was the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan last Sunday on Face the Nation or the Secretary of State this week, they are clear that we are running out of time, and it's a matter of weeks before they have to pull the plug on these talks.
All right, Margaret Brennan for us. Margaret, always good to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.